Good morning and welcome everybody. You're watching the morning news on CNN News 18 and my name is Aisha Varma. But today isn't just any normal day. Today we are covering the happenings at the G7, the Group of Seven. It's an annual summit and it's taking place in Hiroshima, Japan this year. Now you will remember the name Hiroshima because of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. Now those atomic bombings were American bombing raids on these two Japanese cities during World War II, which marked the first use of atomic weapons in the war. It's even more significant now due to the current war taking place in Ukraine. Now remember, Russia invaded Ukraine over a year ago, 14 months and counting. The invasion took place on February 24th. Prime Minister Modi is in Hiroshima and he is a guest at the G7. He has over 40 engagements which are slotted and he is, of course, taking part in the G7 summit. Now, he also unveiled the statue of the Mahatma Gandhi bust in Hiroshima, and it was as a message of peace. He is slated to speak with partner nations at the G7 sessions on issues such as global peace and stability, climate change, and digital technology as well. Now, along with the session, the Prime Minister will also partake in bilateral meetings with the United Kingdom, France, and Japan. Those are just a few. He is also expected to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the G7 summit. Remember, yesterday there was information received about how Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had arrived at the G7 summit and he is there in person. A few important things that are on the table when it comes to the G7 summit is how Moscow is going to be reacting to the G7 summit, especially now that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is there. It's also very important that the Prime Minister is going to be meeting Volodymyr Zelensky, considering India's constant stance on the war, which has been to ultimately push for peace and dialogue and diplomacy. Those have been the main big points that India's diplomacy has been pushing through when it comes to the war. Now remember, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is at the G7 summit. All eyes are going to be on, among other things, especially because the G7 summit is going to be discussing a wide range of topics. But this very important factor is going to be one of the main focuses, considering the current ongoing war in Ukraine.
G7 समिट की मेरी इस विजिट में मुझे सबसे पहले पूज्य महात्मा गांधी की प्रतिमा का अनावरण का सौभाग्य मिलना, ये अपने आप में एक बहुत ही बड़ा सुयोग है। आज विश्व क्लाइमेट और आतंकवाद की लड़ाई से जूझ रहा है।
Now remember, the Prime Minister is going to be attending multiple things. It's not just the G7 that he's going to be focusing on. He's also going to be attending the Forum for the Indo-Pacific Islands Cooperation, otherwise known as the FIPIC, and he's also going to be attending the Quad. Now, as you remember, the Quad was essentially supposed to take place next week in Sydney, Australia, but that was cancelled after United States President Joe Biden, who's also, of course, attending the G7, he had essentially pulled out of the Quad in Sydney due to the debt crisis that is looming back in the United States. Now we're going to continue our coverage with Maria Shakil, who is joining us from Hiroshima, Japan.
Hello everyone, welcome to this special broadcast. Of course, it is 6 a.m. in India, but here in Japan, it is 9:30. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is done with his one crucial bilateral with his Japanese counterpart, Prime Minister Kishida. Thereafter, he interacted with the Indian diaspora and unveiled the Gandhi bust inside the Hiroshima Memorial Park. Right there, you can see that dome. If the camera could zoom in and show that. That is the Hiroshima Memorial Park, the Ganbeku Dome, which is famously known as the atomic bomb dome. So certainly Hiroshima as a city which stands as a living testament of what happened, the destruction of a war, how a war, particularly an atomic bomb war, can destroy a country. Prime Minister Narendra Modi establishing Gandhi, unveiling Gandhi, becomes particularly significant because this G7 summit, for which I am here in Hiroshima, is happening in the backdrop of a live conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And hence Gandhi and his principles become more relevant in the times that we live in. I did speak to the Indians who were present there. There was a great euphoria, and at the same time, an event which is high on symbolism, an event which was high on messaging. Let's first listen in to the Indians, and I'll bring in Ashok Sajanhar. Okay, I will play that, interaction with the Indians in just a bit. Ashok Sajanhar, welcome to this early morning broadcast of India. Although Japan is 3.5 hours ahead of India, so it is still early morning. Good morning to you, sir, and good morning to all the viewers. We have been talking about the bilaterals. Of course, today is a crucial day in the G7 summit, the messaging that will be with regards to Ukraine. There'll be a meeting that the Prime Minister has with Prime Minister Zelensky. All that aside, let's begin with the imagery of the day. The imagery and the big political messaging, the big diplomatic messaging that's coming from the Prime Minister with that unveiling of the Gandhi bust. Ambassador Sajanhar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maria. Always a pleasure to be with you and delighted to see you far away in Hiroshima. So the messaging that you mentioned here, I think the symbolism, I think it's very powerful. It's very strong because particularly in the context, as you very rightly mentioned, that the bust of Mahatma Gandhi is being unveiled when there is a live conflict going thousands of kilometers away. And Gandhi's message was one of peace. It was one of ahimsa. It was one of non-violence. And that is the message that India has also been giving, India stands for peace. It takes a balanced and a neutral position as far as the conflict between the two sides is concerned. And they should come to the negotiating table. There should be diplomacy and dialogue, which should be allowed to play its role. And that is what India stands for. That is what Gandhi stood for. So whether it was 100 years ago when Gandhi was fighting the British, or today when there is this very damaging war going on, we still stand on the side of peace. Maria.